Much earlier than probably anybody expected, it's time for another recap from our ongoing Edge of the Empire campaign. One of the reasons why this one is coming so early is that some significant events have taken place, and I want to talk about them while they're still fresh in my mind and exciting, but also because we're reaching a point of change in our play group. The player of Paul Highwind will be going back to the United States with his family, and so that will significantly change the dynamic of how play happens. Now, while we are assuming that he'll be able to join in, at least from time to time, via Hangouts, there are no guarantees in life. And so we have been moving toward a point where we can seamlessly allow that character to move off, maybe to come back or maybe not as things go. Now, we definitely hope that Captain Paul Highwind will be able to contribute in the ongoing adventures of the campaign, but, you know, when you have the time and when you have the awareness and you have the friendships going on, you can do things like preparing for the possible exit of a character. So that's what's been on our minds. And as you remember from the last recap, we've only been able to play for like 90 minutes at a time every other week or so. So let's get down to this recap, where it's possible that this was the last session that we all played together, participating as a group. Now, we had intended to come together all in the same room. That didn't actually happen, so two of the players, Moss and T3, came in via Hangout. So, I mean, this is definitely a part of how we play, so, you know, no guarantees that Captain Paul Highwind is gone, but just in case. But on to the recap. As long-term viewers or listeners to these recaps might remember, the campaign is actually called The Seeds of Reckoning. And in the last few sessions, a lot of those seeds have begun to, deliver their fruits. And mostly on top of Henry. This has been, if I were to give a subtitle to the last few sessions, it might be The Trials of Henry Forsyth. He has had a very rough row to hoe and came through it changed. The perception of the character in the player's mind has changed. He endured an experience which will have a significant effect on him. At the same time, the other characters have been put in situations where they're offered choices. If there's been a theme lately, it has been about these decision points. Where do I go from here? What am I accomplishing? We've been working so hard on this particular goal that has often tasted bitter in our mouths. Now that achieving it is within our grasp, where do we go from here? And there are many, many threads that are pulling on there, many seeds that have been planted, and it's harvest time. Which crops, however, are they going to harvest? That's where the campaign has headed by virtue of what's going on in our personal lives, but also at this stage of play. We've been playing for 3 years now. The characters have matured. The portrayal of the characters have matured. Our ability to talk about them between play has matured and deepened. And the discussions go far beyond what you did last session and spend much more time on why and how the other characters will react to it. So play has been very satisfying, although the amount of play has at times been frustrating. I think it's also fair to say that for the characters, hopefully much less so for the players, but for the characters, this has also been a period of great frustration. Certainly for Henry, and maybe for Moss and T3, and probably for Highwind as well. There are pressures on them from these various decision points, these choices that they need to make, which as the sessions move forward, as the clock unwinds, grows more and more tense, more and more frustrating. So, what has actually happened since the last time? Well, a lot of the banter between characters for the last 3 or 4 weeks has been about what color coffin Henry wants. So when we resumed after the last recap, we had left on a pretty significant cliffhanger. We have a downed Imperial shuttle in streets of Tatooine. At each intersection leading away from this street, there are collections of citizens being held by squads of stormtroopers. They've been doing a house-to-house search for Henry. A huge sandstorm is sweeping in. The suns are setting on the horizon, so the long evening is about to settle in. The sandstorm, the sand is whipping, the wind is rising, but the impact of the shuttle, with its engines still firing, is kicking up the dirt and the sand from the street and just roiling clouds. So visibility is rapidly dropping to zero. And the stormtroopers are scattering out of the wreckage of the shuttle as Henry, using the power of the Force, tears it apart. The engine casing explodes. Some of the engines shoot off into the growing darkness. No idea where they're landing. The huge sail on top, it tears off, and Henry can't for a moment understand what is happening. It should have been easy for him to pull this wreckage down on top of the scrambling operatives and their stormtroopers and just mash them into the street, but it doesn't. The Force doesn't follow his will exactly as he hoped it would. And as the lead operative comes in closer with his lightsaber blazing, all Henry can really see in the roiling smoke and dust is the faintest glimmer of the reflected light from the lightsaber. He can barely see his own hand in front of his face, and he's surrounded by kind of a warm whitish glow from his own white lightsaber. And then the dust thickens and he loses sight of everything. All he can really hear is that harsh electric hum of the lightsabers as his opponents fan out, the two of them. And still there has been no sense of evil, of the coldness of the dark side. Who is he opposing? They clearly are Imperial operatives who he has connected to the dark side of the Force forever, and yet these two do not seem to be so connected in that way. Tyra, screaming, crying out, "No, no, no," is being hauled off or is moving off, lost through the dust. He can't tell. And what should he do? Should he divide his attention between finding her and protecting himself, or should he move in and attack the target and express that way? That's what he decides to do. He's going to move in and he's going to attack the target. Now, mechanically, what's going on in the background is that Lawrence, the player, is coming face to face with the power of suppress for the very first time, meaning he successfully activates the Force and he's trying to use it in the scene and simply cannot. This is a very powerful ability. It makes very logical sense in the context of the Star Wars universe, how things play out, how you can have an ideology like the dark side as we see in the films. Ours is conducted differently in our campaign, but still the idea is there that evil people working together in organizations, they tend to try and climb over each other to reach the top, and that's fine to a point, but when you get to the top, it gets a little annoying if you're defending your title all the time. And a power like this is something that can rationally explain how hard it is, how you can have someone like Vader on a leash for so long. So I don't have any trouble incorporating the power of suppress into the campaign. I do have trouble selling it as something that's fun. It's rarely fun in a game to come face to face with something that just obviates your ability to act. Now, that's not exactly what this does. This obviates your ability to act in a specific way, maybe your chosen way, and it forces you to think on your feet, which is fine and can be fun. But that first time it's a shock. It's like, what do you mean it doesn't work? What do you mean I have to try something else, that I simply cannot do this thing that I'm used to doing. It's shocking. It's invasive. It's upsetting. And when you're not prepared for it, as we weren't, because I'd never used the power in the entirety of the campaign, this was the first time. This is really, I think, when everybody playing recognized that this wasn't an operative like we had seen before. This was something major walking onto the set. This was a big deal. And Henry's alone. This is also a situation we've never really had before. We've had groups split off into twos and threes. We've had the whole group facing really extreme opposition before, but never have we had a single character facing off against multiple serious threats. So, tensions ran hot. So we had to do things very carefully. I had very, very specific notes about how I could run this very complicated character. This set of operatives, our version of Inquisitors, they were very, very detailed. I built them like characters. I built them for a specific purpose. They had to be able to justify their role in the galaxy. I took a long time building these characters. I did not specifically build them for a purpose of must be able to defeat Henry or must be able to do this. I built them so that they would feel right in their role as who they are. Now, working together, working in tandem, working with all of these stormtroopers, working with very extreme levels of knowledge about Henry's background and who he is, they had a lot of advantages. The deck was stacked toward them. Henry didn't have the tools to notice their ambush, didn't have the tools really to escape it once it started to close, and was left with violence being his only recourse, which they could predict and come with enough forces to show him that violence was not the answer. Surrender was the answer. And this was the powerful, difficult choice facing Henry. Surrender, or you do not know what will happen. This could be your death. This could be your apprentice's death. This could be your maiming and abandonment in the street as we take your apprentice to work our will upon her ourselves. He has no idea what terrible thing he will be unable to oppose. Is surrender even the best option? He has no way to know. And Henry being Henry, he chooses to fight. So he shatters the shuttle. Its pieces rain down all around them. He has no way of knowing if civilians are harmed or not in all of this dust. And he moves in resigned to a lightsaber battle. If I cannot, use the power of the Force to keep us at a distance so that I can focus on rescuing Tyra, then come get me. Right? And he moves in for a lightsaber duel. Now, we had struggled a bit with lightsaber duels in the past because of, they operate differently than regular combat. It's possible to have exchanges go back and forth, and it was fairly easy for the playgroup to adapt to the idea that one turn is not one single squeeze of the trigger, that blaster bolts are flying and people are relocating from cover to cover, and that it's a very dynamic scene tied to one role with shared narration between the game master and the players who are involved. But a lightsaber duel, it was harder to make that step, mostly for the players, but still, the idea that one roll wasn't one strike with the lightsaber was hard, and the requirement that I was putting on people that you roll the dice and then you narrate a sequence of exchanges, make it exciting, make it interesting, right? You've got this much damage that you're going to do over as a result of this roll. Is it applied in little strikes? Is it one big cut after a series of parries and ripostes and exchanges and movements for defense and offense? It doesn't matter. You are free to narrate within the confines of you were successful this turn and you inflicted this much damage. And when they were not successful, then it was on me to narrate how it went. And we've got powers in play like parry and riposte and center of being, which have a significant effect on how the normal mechanics of combat play out. We've had a variety of ways in play for crits to be adjusted up in severity or down in severity. We've got ways to negate damage or amplify damage and turning things into maneuvers that are normally actions and whatnot. We've got a lot of different talents and abilities and skills in play. It's a lot to juggle, so I have very detailed notes. And we haven't done a combat for a while. It's been a lot of role play, a lot of investigation, a lot of running away. So, characters or players are flipping through character sheets, and I have people who are not with me in the same room, and I don't have characters who are in the same scene. I've got Henry by himself with an NPC who's basically out of commission. I've got Captain Paul Hyland, who is kind of in an emotional funk, and I've got Moss, who's trying to tie everything together, and I've got T3, who's got plans of her own, and I've got bounty hunters about to show up at any moment at either one of these scenes, and so on and so on and so on. I've got all of these balls in the air, and they need to be juggled. So I'm very ruthlessly cutting from scene to scene. Right? So we might have one roll with Henry with a lightsaber exchange, and then while he's actually sorting out the damage and wondering what he's going to do next and hoping he gets to act next, I'm talking to someone else and I've moved on. So the tension was always really high. The desire to do something right now was kept active, and for the 90 minutes, the pace wasn't too bad. I could have done a lot better, but it wasn't too awfully bad. We didn't have long periods of drought where people didn't have anything to do. But there was a massive difference in the level of danger and import between the scenes. We've got a planning scene going on over here, we have an introspection scene going on over here, and we've got a life and death struggle going on here. So there was a lot of rise and fall in mood and tension, this sense of import. So that was a challenge. It was a challenge I'd like to do more of and get more facile with again. This is something I used to do all the time back in my World of Darkness days when I had 7, 8, or 9 players sitting around. You had to cut really fast, but you can't keep all of your skills sharp all of the time. So Henry's in this lightsaber duel, and finally we're getting the lightsaber duel that I felt was really possible. Right? So he's contributing real description. I'm getting to contribute real description. I have an opponent that doesn't want to just kill. I've got the interesting challenge of trying to capture Henry when Henry wants to kill everybody on the street. Now, I could have solved this at any turn by just raining down stun grenades from the stormtroopers who are all around. Right? But they want to see what he can do. And so we get these lightsaber exchanges. Henry is hurt. The operative is hurt. The other operative is circling. What is he doing? What effect is he having? A third operative shows up, and he is blind. He's wearing a faceless, basically, mask representing this. And Henry knows instinctively through the Force who this is. This is the operative he tangled with on Briss 2, who he blinded at that time. And he can feel the evil, he can feel the cold darkness roiling off of this guy as he enters the scene. And he has Tyra, he's got her around the neck, and it's surrender or... And Henry doesn't surrender. Henry continues to fight because that is who he is. He will always resist. It's interesting. Tyra, by virtue of triumphs earned in play at just the right time by Lawrence's rolls, is able to free herself. Right? She gets away from this hold by the operative and escapes into the dust. Henry has no idea what's about to befall her. Another vicious exchange with the operative, and then the signal is given and the stun grenades come raining down. And that's how we close out the session from Henry. I've told all of that in sequence so it makes more sense. And so now we're going to go back in time. We're going to go to some of these other scenes that I was jumping to. To make cutting between these scenes work and to give them the right feel, I, as the game master, had to decide that certain aspects of my description had to make me an unreliable narrator. I wasn't clear on exactly how much time was passing, how far apart things were, and when some things were taking place. And so, while we have right now a scene with Henry battling for his life in the street, we also have right now a planning session where they don't know anything's wrong with Henry at all. When in relation to each other do these two scenes take place? The players don't know. Right? I have to know. I have to have a very, very strict accounting of time, in a very Gygaxian sense, it turns out. I have to have a very strict accounting of time so that any decision made by the player can have its proper effect on the others. If Tyra has escaped, where is she on the timeline in relation to the other characters? What chances, what opportunities for coincidence are there for her to hook up with them? If Henry is somehow victorious, and I always had to account for the possibility that he would win, because frankly, over the 3 years, the group has always won. They've found a way to escape when I thought there was no way to escape. They've found a way to overcome opponents that I figured would probably be too tough for them, and etc., etc. All of the, wow, this is a possible TPK right here situations that have come their way over the 3 years, they have managed to get around. This was the one time where the capture that I felt was a pretty foregone conclusion actually came about, but not entirely as I foresaw, because thanks to Henry's struggles, Tyra gets away. So, as I said, it's very important to know where they are in the timeline for me, but in order for the scenes to play out properly, the players need to feel disjointed in time, so they're not trying to find ways to help each other, because these two scenes are not happening at the same time, but we're playing them at the same time. So the group is really good about handling in-character knowledge versus out-of-character knowledge. We haven't had a conversation like that since the very, very early days of play, when it was being explained as a concept to people who hadn't played before. So I'm not worried about that. I want to give everybody the freedom to be in the scene that they're in, because there are elements in those scenes which are very fundamentally important to who these characters are as characters. And as we're marching toward this kind of possible end point for a big piece of the campaign, I wanted them to have the freedom to take the scene in that direction if they wanted to. So, what do we have? We have Moss and T3 and all these rebels and all these reservist rebel pilots swarming out of the desert and congregating together to move all of this material to Bryn Valiant's northern stronghold, which had long been abandoned. And Hywen finally picks up his smuggler trench coat. It's not quite as cool as the one he ordered, but it comes with this bonus tucked inside it. Tucked inside Bryn Valiant's smuggler's trench coat. And I think there was something slightly satisfying about being able to take this away from Bryn Valiant as well. But inside the coat was this old datapad, and the datapad had all this information about routes and pickups and payments and things. And while it was interesting, it took T3 to pull out of it this particular data of where he was making these drops. And they realized that using this information, that Bryn Valiant had been working with Miata the Hutt all through his association with Jabba. It was like this double agent is playing both sides, and Jabba never knew. And so that was satisfying to be able to learn that piece of information. But more importantly, he had made all these different pickups from Miata's locations, and one of them just might be her stronghold. And they had very strongly settled on the idea that they have to take her out. She's responsible for too much chaos on this planet. She's responsible for too much death heading in their direction. They don't want to be on the bad side of Jabba, and he's the devil they know rather than the devil they don't know. And they've learned enough about Miata to realize they will never be able to trust her. And besides, just a couple of days ago, she tried to blow them into their component particles twice and sent an assassin after them. So even though they were able to turn that assassin to their point of view, the bombs still leave a pretty big impression. So they want her gone. So it turns out that Highwind, charming devil that he is, and with his growing reputation within the Rebel Alliance, is able to make the rebellion realize that Miata's a threat to them as well. So these, as they are regrouping, waiting for confirmation of orders from the Alliance, they recognize the need to make a strike against Miata if Highwind can, and his crew can give them the coordinates and the confidence in a mission profile that they can trust. And they do. With T3 working with Moss, they pretty much eliminate all sites but one. Logically, tactically, strategically, geographically, it makes sense that this is where she goes to when she's in hiding, and it's definitely time. She has risked too much exposure to Jabba in her conflict with the bounty hunters that are chasing down the crew, and in her own efforts to find and neutralize the crew. She has revealed too much, so she has withdrawn, retreated into her stronghold. And Moss and T3 are pretty close to positive that they know where it is. So, finally, after all this time, our crew gets themselves in X-Wings, and they're backed up by Rebel pilots as their wingmen, and they have a fleet, or 2 wings of Y-Wings to back them up, and they are going to rip across the desert, and they are going to bomb her back to the Stone Age. But Highwind has another genius idea. He's going to send Moss, T3 as his astromech droid, and a wingman to do a very quick flyover of the location and determine that it's real. The Rebel forces will be in motion, ready to join a strike group, but they need to give him time to get to Jabba. And he's going to reveal that he has found where she is, and he's willing to show Jabba where she is so that he can bask in the glory of Jabba destroying his opponent. Everybody else has promised him that they would find Miata, that they would help Jabba get his revenge, but it's Paul Highwind that delivers. So Jabba takes this hook, line, and sinker and organizes his forces and sends them ripping across the desert to the location, which by this point Moss and T3 have confirmed is real, and the strike begins. So as Moss and their wingman and the Y-Wings begin their runs, Highwind is showing up in his X-Wing, and Jabba is not too far behind them in his battle barge, which is not the sail barge we see in Empire. It's outfitted for a different purpose. And then quite a ways behind that, there are swarms of smaller armed speeders which are making their way across the desert like this kind of infesting armies. A lot of Gamorrean guards and whatnot for descriptive purposes. So battle is enjoined, and I mean, no one's trained in gunnery. They're good pilots, but they're not starfighter pilots, so it's awkward. But their target is a sitting duck. She has this massive freighter buried in the sands, and while it's capable of flight, the recent tropical storms have damaged that capability. She's got to dig out, or she's got to lift up out of the sands, and she doesn't have time. She's caught flat-footed. So she's organizing her forces inside her massive buried freighter to repel boarders, never expecting that X-Wings and Y-Wings are suddenly going to start raining down proton torpedoes. Just boom, 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 and they just split the spine of the thing wide open. It's devastating what those can do against a mostly defenseless target. So, as we come to the end of this session, right, we have Henry unconscious, and we have this very cool, surprisingly fun, like in contrast to Henry's desperate struggle for his life, this kind of other-sided, lopsided attack. Like they suddenly felt like they really had the upper hand over Miata. There was no way she could touch them in these highly advanced starfighters, fully loaded. So they split the thing wide open. There's explosions and detonations going off inside. Jabba's launching his forces to streak across the sand and board. There's blaster fire and gunnery fire coming from the freighter, from not fixed positions but from temporary positions as they're set to repel boarders, and it's quite a dramatic scene that we can imagine around the table. And then I end the session with electronic warfare attacks being foiled by T3. There's something, this highly capable slicing character that they've encountered before in Miata's employ is trying to drop their X-Wings and Y-Wings out of the sky with this massively powerful EW attack, which she is able to foil, and she gets enough successes and triumphs that she's able to protect the whole flight of them. And so once again, T3 proving herself to really be the star of the series. A message comes out, and it's from another member of T3's production line, one that she had lost in an episode somewhere in the middle of the campaign, whether in the core, and they're dealing with the Maker who is using droids as assassins and trying to find a way to transfer consciousness from organic beings into droids in a pristine state. So she had lost this last member of her production line in that climactic confrontation with the Maker's forces. A heartbreaking scene where he sacrifices himself so that she can get away. And now his voice comes over the comms saying, "Don't let me die again." Fade to black on that scene. So we've had another week to go with, what does this really mean? Is it really this character, Colin? Is it somehow a fake? And if it's a fake, how did they find out this deep knowledge about T3? I mean, so there's lots of questions there. What really happened to Henry? Jokes are flying fast and furious all week long about what's your next character going to be and this sort of stuff. So it is with a great deal of anticipation that we settle down for the next session. So that next session opened up with a very quick recap of the situation out in the desert, and nothing but a recap of past events for Henry. And I've given no clues whatsoever. In fact, people weren't even sure if Lawrence was going to come to play Henry, because they didn't recognize, I had given them no sign as to how things were going to match up, if they were going to match up. But there he was, sitting at the table, and all is well. And we roll the destiny pool and check obligation and all of that stuff, and then we begin the session out in the desert. And so the smoke is roiling up. The storm has broken here, but they can see it on the distance moving towards Mos Espa and on and on. And so that was the first clue that I dropped, mentioning Mos Espa in relation to this location. Like, why would they note it? Well, of course they would note it, because that's the last known destination for Henry, as he's going to go drop off the van there. So that's why they're thinking about it, of course. So I replay the communication from the last session. Colin's last message, "Don't let me die again." T3 is dead set on finding out the truth. And so the very first thing she does is a massive onslaught of offensive slicing to figure out if she can get into the system and determine before they land if there's any truth to this message at all. And of course, she discovers, to her horror, she discovers two minds opposing her in the electronic systems of this dying ship. And that's Colin and this spidery slicer droid that she has locked horns with before. So now she's in for a penny, in for a pound. She is absolutely going to free Colin, however it is that he came to be here. So Moss has to find out how good a pilot he actually is by landing in very unfavorable conditions. If he chooses the sand, the X-Wing might simply sink into the sand. If he lands on the freighter, it might explode underneath him. Its surface is very, very slick anyway. It might just slide off and then it, wind up buried in the sand anyway. Very, very challenging and stressful. Highwind is advising him not to do it. He does it anyway. And with Highwind's last-minute guidance, offering boost dice for the assistance rules, he does manage to pull it off. It's not great, but well, he didn't fail. So the X-Wing lands mainly on the freighter, then slides off, but in a position where it will be able to lift off again with its repulsors. So that's nerve-wracking, and they get out and they have to figure out how are they going to get T3 up the slick side of this thing to a point where they can get in and avoid all the main combat. They've got to get to the main command center of the freighter. Now Moss doesn't consider himself to be a soldier by any stretch of the imagination. He knows his place. He's fought in a kind of a frontline engagement on Briss 2, and distinguished himself, but was injured. So he's learned his role as a scout, as an explorer, as a collector of information, maybe even a spy, dare I say it, but not as a soldier. And so he has also been growing a lot over the years, and he has started to come into his own in terms of leadership. No longer just backing up Highwind in those situations of charm and leadership. He has over time been developing his own stature, and people listen to him when he speaks now. And so he gets on the comms and he requests backup from some of Jabba's forces, and a squad of Gamorreans, four axe-wielding Gamorreans, divert their speeder, and they come to their assistance and manhandle T3 up the side of the freighter and down into this smoking hole, so they very close to the cockpit or the command center of the freighter, and begin moving their way. And they are their support, their meat shields practically. And as they're moving through all of this terrain, trying to go as stealthily as they can, Moss and T3 moving separately from the Gamorreans. It's really quite cold the way that they handled the Gamorreans. Please walk over here, be a target. T3 is connecting with the surviving systems and trying to get a line on their opposition, beginning the early stages of her particular war with the spidery slicer. So by the time they actually encounter the thing, they've had to go through many physical obstacles, and during their stealth check to close on their opponent, a despair is rolled, and so this manifests in as they're sneaking through this cracked wall. They're going to make a surprise entrance into the back of the captain's lounge at the back of the command quarters of this freighter. The floor tears asunder, and this massive plume of smoke comes up, and the roof, opens up with it. As the thing is settling in the sand, and the skin is just ripping. So they narrowly avoided falling down at the crevasse, but now their forward progress is impeded, and giving their opposition time to scuttle away and plan something else. What they don't know is that T3's proximity is rousing Colin from his kind of submissive state as a part of this Franken droid, and he's going to join the battle for them or with them. So they get across the crevasse. They begin exchanging suppressive fire with it, and T3 and the spider / Colin droid really engage. And with the massive power that she's developed in her slicing skills over the 3 years, she's very brutal in forcing her way into its defenses, and asking me for every possible advantage that she's learned is possible during the course of 3 years of flight. And she just hammers this thing into submission. And she benefits, of course, from Colin's help. And so now they have this completely powered down, very, very large droid, and they're stuck in this ship. But they still have the Gamorreans, and so they use the Gamorreans to haul this thing out of the freighter. There's combat going on all around them. The Y-wings have done a couple of more bombing runs. The Miata's forces are engaged with Jabba's forces, and chaos is everywhere. So outside, while all of this has been going on, Highwind has been enjoying the freedom and the power of using this X-wing, and he has noticed this escape pod midships that is blocked by wreckage. The pod doors won't open, so this pod can't eject. And so he calls in the Y-wings to do a strike, and he serves as their wingman as they do so, just in case the fire from the freighter is a threat. So they hit it with ordnance, and the way that the roll turns out, it blasts the doors open, but the pod is okay, and it escapes. So Hyman blows it out of the air. It comes crashing down, and he circles around to check the wreckage because who's in the pod, and Miata's massive armored form. She's fully head to tip, tail tip in battle armor. She comes tearing her way out through the steel, and just eyes blazing, and their heavy laser pod on her shoulder is searching for targets. And so he calls in another attack, and he lines up his own ship to make the run, coming in really low because he doesn't want to risk it, and decides he's going to use proton torpedoes on this. He just wants it gone. So blam, he fires off a very, very expensive round of proton torpedoes, and obliterates the scene. But out of the corner of his eye, he notices something, so he makes another pass, but he can't. He's moving too fast, can't quite see it through all the smoke, so he lands the X-wing, gets out, and he knows he's going to have to support Moss and T3 anyway, and he's going to have to show up and be by Jabba's side when he finishes, when he declares this battle over anyway. So he lands, he gets out of the X-wing, and he moves in on the location, and discovers that the battle armor is twitching, and it's still fighting, it's still searching for targets, but it's all blown open and empty, and he doesn't know, did she crawl her way out of the hole? Is she still here somehow, still alive through all of that? And then the battle armor goes limp. This is precisely the moment in time where T3 has shut down the spider slicer droid. So still throughout this scene, I'm very carefully and painstakingly tracking time from turn to turn, from scene to scene, because it's very, very important in terms of Henry. When will Lawrence be able to bring Henry into the session, if at all? Because maybe the characters won't ever be in an opportunity to try for a rescue or recovery mission. And that's the other thing we've been talking about all week, is it's going to be awesome. We finally get to break into a Star Destroyer or something like that and rescue one of our crewmates. So I just kept my mouth shut the whole time, because it may very likely have gone that way. The timelines might never have synced up again, and so they would have to make a plan to figure out which of the 4 Star Destroyers he'd been taken to and how to get him out. So that would have been another session, and poor Lawrence would have been sitting there just watching us play for the whole time. But just 90 minutes, right? So each set of rounds that all of this particular action has been going on, Rebel communication has been talking about a disturbance in Mos Espa, and each turn they're getting a little bit more information. So at this point, now they know that another Imperial shuttle is leaving Mos Espa, and on board it are prisoners that they've actually come down. They've done a house-to-house search, and they've taken prisoners. Okay. Now the players are awesome about this. They don't automatically assume it's Henry. I would have forgiven them, I guess, for having done so, because it had been such a long set of weeks building up to this, but they don't. So they continue doing what they're going to do. Highwind is going to go find Jabba and stand there to listen to his declaration of triumph and all this stuff. And Moss and T3 are going to escape out of the freighter with this spider bot and go back to Jabba's palace to get Henry's ship and get it out of the palace, just in case Jabba is somehow displeased with all of this. Because at this moment, they're starting to suspect that Miata has escaped, right? Because the battle armor is empty. So at this moment, a whole bunch of stuff starts to happen. Jabba's forces finally break into the freighter, and they're swarming in, and Jabba's going crazy, smashing the place all apart. And they are trying to get the spider up out of the freighter. They've got ropes and these sparking cables and whatnot, and the Gamorreans are getting burned trying to lift this thing out of there. And they hear another Hutt's voice, and it's just smashing, and it's trying to bash its way into the control room. And they recognize, nope, Miata didn't escape. She's right here, and she's just on the other side of this paper-thin piece of steel, which we were able to break through on the other side of the port side of the ship. So we've really got to get out of here before she comes in. And so that adds some more tension. They get out as Jabba's forces begin swarming toward the front end of the ship, and Highwind has to consider, do I really want to go in there? And that's a really funny conversation. I really like how Paul brings that aspect of the character to life. Like, he's really, really brave, just not when he's considering going into combat. And then this final message comes through from the rebels, calling them to reform. They have a new assignment. They have to deal with this shuttle. They've identified that there are Imperial operatives, 3 Imperial operatives, one of whom they recognize from reports from Brist that are just too important to the Rebel Alliance that these guys get taken out. Captured if possible, but take them out. So the fighter support all take off. They signal to Highwind and Moss, you need to come with us, but they follow their orders, and they form up and they peel out, and they're heading toward Mos Espa. Highwind's now really torn. Moss isn't quite sure what to do, but they very quickly come to a decision in the very next turn when the final communication waves off the attack on the Imperial shuttle and challenges them to capture it, because there's just this one sentence: they captured a Jedi. The effect of that sentence around the table, and even when I said it, I got chills, and I'd been thinking about it for a couple of days. Because of the mass combat rules that Fantasy Flight Games has provided for us, I find it really quick and easy to plan out different skirmishes and things. And I've been using them to build news reports and things for the next stage of the campaign, especially if they choose to go back to Brist. And even if they don't choose to go back to Brist, it's an interesting exercise for me anyway. How would these exchanges really take place? How would these battles between the rebels and the Imperials take shape? And so I've been using it to track and put strain on Imperial troop assignments and ship assignments and this sort of stuff. So I, in the days between these 2 sessions, did something with the mass combat rules, and everything fell into place. How would Henry's battle in the street have played out from the point of view of the spectators? And I was really, really glad in that moment that we didn't have a 4-hour session where these 2 things would have happened together, and this never would have occurred to me, I think. But because the session was split in half, it did. And so I got to look at it from the point of view of the citizens of Mos Espa who'd been pulled out of their homes and used as bait almost, and used as meat shields. And they see this figure that they're getting these mixed messages from the Empire about what kind of threat he is. And they've been told he's a high-ranking Imperial official who has lost his mind and needs to be recovered. And they've also been told he's a threat against the Empire and has to be taken down. Who do they believe? Well, when the lightsaber comes out, this brilliant white lightsaber, and he's surrounded by stormtroopers and being attacked by these very specialized looking stormtroopers in red, it's very clear to the oppressed citizens of Tatooine who the good guy is and what he is. And what he is a figure out of legend. This is a Jedi, and he's standing up for them. I don't know if that scene and that description of it can balance out some of the frustration and stress that the battle itself had for Lawrence as Henry, but I can hope it in some way, balance the scales again, that it is in some way worth it, that the loss that he never wanted Henry to suffer can still be a fond memory. Now, at this point, we still don't know where Henry is, and our crew is now triply divided. T3 and the Gamorreans and the spider droid are in a speeder heading back to Jabba's palace at top speeds. Nothing else matters. Moss, without an astromech droid, is flying his X-Wing. Highwind is flying his X-Wing, and the Y-Wings and the other X-Wings are at Mos Espa. So they form up, and they are trying to find the Imperial shuttle that's been described. And I give him one last, description of flying the X-Wings, and Paul seems to be really enjoying this, and David playing Moss has been wanting to do this for a while, so that's kind of fun. So I give them a flyby description of Mos Espa with a view of the ruined Imperial shuttle in the streets and a big plume of smoke, and the sandstorm has just passed through that region, so there's drifts and dust everywhere. But what they notice as they sweep around the devastation of the combat zone, where this shuttle is wrecked, and they still don't know the connection or the importance of that shuttle, what they see is that there's an insurgence happening. The locals are fighting against the stormtroopers, and there's one, possibly the spotter that they've been listening to on the radio throughout this whole scenario, standing on top of this domed roof, waving this massive flag of the rebellion in the smoke as the laser fire and blaster fire is going on down below. Now, as they pass over the city, they can clearly see that the reinforcements are moving in that location. These people, there's no way that they can win. But the example made for them by this Jedi was too overwhelming. They had to strike a blow against the Empire. So before moving on the shuttle, which is just on the edge of their scopes with its escort, they do a strafing run, and they take out troop carriers and landers to maybe even the scales and hopefully inspire the men on the ground, women on the ground, to return to their boat holes before it's too late, before the Empire really drops the hammer on them. But there is this sense of sadness in the background that this brief rebellion, this brief uprising, will not be anything like the 8-day uprising on Briss 2. It will be more on the order of 8 minutes. But they gather up their forces after their strafing run, and they punch it, and they're rocketing up in the atmosphere. And they are very, very concerned that they be able to catch this thing before it hits open space, because then they have to deal with the Star Destroyers, of course. And they find it. It has 2 TIE aggressors, which they've never seen before, as escort. And so we're going to engage in battle. We're going to take out these escorts, and then Highwind and Moss are going to team up and convince the pilot that they have to land. Meanwhile, at Jabba's palace, T3 is convincing all the droids that litter up that place, droids that have been tortured to find out details about Miata's operation. She's got all of them working with her to load up her prize and get it in the Forgotten Night and help her get that out of there. So Moss and Highwind, working together as each other's wingmen. They take out first one aggressor. Highwind, for all of his lack of skill as a starfighter gunner, he's still an incredible pilot and incredibly agile. And so he's able to get into position, and he's able to take advantage of the linked guns of his starfighter, and he wipes the first aggressor in the first round. Moss moves in, heavily damaging the second aggressor, and is able to finish it off the next time. And then they move in on the shuttle, which is still trying to get away, but they catch up with it. And with their position and their very superior firepower, they tell the pilot to land or be destroyed, and he buys it. So the scene ends, and possibly this phase of the campaign ends, because it's, like I said, it's possible we'll never be able to physically play with Paul again. With time running out in our play session before we all have to go off to work, we end this session with that sense, but we end the session with the characters moving up with, being flanked by other rebel pilots and moving in on the shuttle. And they've had such an effect on the shuttle, thanks primarily to Moss's talents, that a surrender is pretty easy. And they know they're still under the guns of X-Wings and Y-Wings. They open up the back and they move in, and in the back there is this, like sarcophagus, where they can see Henry contained inside in some form of coma or induced slumber, alive. And then we cut to black. Who knows what will happen next, except that each of the characters is now faced with a choice. What is Henry going to do? Tyra is out there. We don't know where. She's his apprentice. He's got to track her down. But once he's done that, what does he do with her? Do they go back to Haven, seeking out his original mentor, Dalil, and the strange alien beings with their strange understanding of the Force that are there? Does he do that? Does he get together with Moss, find Tyra, and then head to the lost Jedi or somehow Force-related temple that they spotted on a deserted world before they even found Haven? They've been meaning to go back to it and never have. Do they go there? Do they track down the coordinates, the precise coordinates of the crystal temple mentioned in the diary of the Dark Force user that they bested not too many months ago? Which trail do they follow? Does he instead go back to Brist, where he has friends and fellow soldiers that he trained to resist the Empire? Does he go there with Highwind? So many threads pulling on Henry. Highwind, likewise, feeling the strong pull of the rebellion getting even stronger, knowing he has to get back to Brist to find out what happened to Solera Crescent, his love and his nemesis. What has happened to her? The Rebel Alliance is being redirected there. The support crew that they have been working with is being directed to Brist as a rescue operation before joining up with the Rebel fleet. Highwind's course seems assured. He's going back to Brist, but who is going with him? Moss, who has lost his last, most direct connection to the mystery his father left him with the death of Wreck at the hands of T3, is now almost adrift again in the universe. Where can he go to solve that mystery? Or does he go with Highwind? Or is it time for him to set out on his own course? Or does he stay with Henry? Or does he go back to Haven? Does he become an explorer in his own right? So many choices open to him. What is the little droid T3 going to do with this opportunity before her of reuniting the shattered pieces of her production line? And the mystery of the Maker still looming before her. He's still alive and still in prison at Haven. Or at least that's the last information that she has. What will the crew do? And over all of this is their former crewmate, HK-85M, and all of the replicated copies of himself are still out there, still hunting them down on this massive bounty brought before them by the outrage of the Bounty Hunters Guild. And of course, the Empire now has a very, very specific reason to want them deader than it wanted them before. I was going for a possible conclusion point that felt a little bit like the ending of The Empire Strikes Back. Maybe we got it.